Well, symbolism has been a source of fascination for me ever since I got involved with esoteric studies, because it's one of the principal means of communication between master and initiates and their pupils. It was also developed, particularly in the medieval period in Europe, as a means of communicating heresy under the ever-watchful eyes of the Church. So it has vital importance. It's also a principal teaching role. Both the ancient Knights Templar and their modern revival orders and the modern brotherhoods of Freemasonry use symbolism very widely in their teaching practices. And they teach in the ancient way using allegory and ritual, so that everything is repeated in a fixed way during the ritual, and symbolism is brought in at different points, at fixed points for fixed periods of time. And that symbolism and that ritual are many centuries old. Some would claim millennia, and there's a certain degree of truth in that. And symbolism is also, it's as old as mankind itself in the spiritual quest. See, man is created with some sort of God-shaped slot within him, which he tries to fill. And our earliest archaeological artifacts are symbols. We start off with the ones discovered by Norbert Castret back in the 1800s at Lescar. Cave paintings. There are similar cave paintings at Altamira, and these are largely of animals.
The stars as well?
Stars, yes, but that actually tends to come a little start to creep in a little later.
Right.
Jacob Bronowski, that wonderful cultural historian, he was an atheist, but even he discerned that there was some magical import behind the symbolism of the cave paintings. But then he backed away from it and tried to put it down as symbols of wish fulfillment for the hunt.
Right.
Now, if he'd have moved short way from Lescar to the caves at Les Trois Frères near Ariège, he would have found the answer, because there is a beautiful cave painting of a man in shaman's costume,
Right.
dressed as an animal, but still nonetheless distinctly a man. And shamanism, of course, was the beginnings of man's ritualized search for spiritual enlightenment. And all the great religions ultimately spring from shamanistic roots if you trace them back far enough. And there's still a practice that is used by hunter-gatherer societies today. It's Native American spirituality is largely based on shamanistic insight, which is very powerful and very, very real. And any spiritual quest, such as the one I'm on or the one you're on, it may mask itself as an outward journey through a sacred landscape.
Yeah.
But in reality, what you're doing is triggering an inward journey. It's a delving inside.
Yes.
At a theological conference back in the 1980s, a wonderful priest, Antonio Padovano, said that people's religious perceptions are changing. We're changing from outward ritual and dogma into an internal search.
Yeah.
And that is the big change that is happening.
Something
That has actually been happening for as long as mankind's been around.
Yeah.
But the churches and the great faiths have monopolized how to do it,
Yeah.
and tended to repress personal inner quest.
So would you go on along with people like Carl Jung again, who said that the inward journey, the journey of the shaman, is to go into the unconscious self,
Yes.
to discover the true
Yeah.
self?
Well, in the great mystical teacher people can only learn about by their own personal experience if they seek. It's an inner quest, and it manifests itself to us all in slightly different ways. And symbolism is a way of communicating at a very deep subconscious level.
Yeah.
Now, according to Rudolf Steiner, who made considerable studies on this, which were very valid, there are at least 9 conscious levels of interpretation of symbolism, and possibly many more, and some that are unconscious. And the early craftsmen who did carvings, be they medieval or even more ancient, sounds bizarre, but they were able to predict the spiritual impact of what they were doing on the people who would see it, people from different cultures.
It's because these symbols were archetypes within all of us.
Yes. Gurdjieff recounts one situation of a carving in northern India, near the northwest frontier, which had been visited by different people from different cultures at totally different times. And their descriptions all marry up. We're not talking about the outward form of the carving, we're talking about the inner experience that resulted from it.
From it, yeah. Well, Gurdjieff was a mystic himself, wasn't he?
Yeah, oh, very much so.
So he recognised this in the symbols himself.
Yeah, and so does everybody who gets any degree along the spiritual path at all.
Right.
So symbolism started with your cave paintings. That's the earliest ones we have, and very, very shortly afterwards we started to get little statuettes of rather fat, pregnant ladies. Another meaning which soon became tied up with it and was made manifest probably most commonly in the medieval carvings of the Green Man, the principles of death to the things of this world and spiritual rebirth to the spiritual world, which is the process of transformation. So symbolism became important very, very early on, and from the cave paintings and the early Earth Mother fertility figures, which usually associated with phases of the moon, because again this was deemed to be part of the importance. We move on to the Neolithic monuments which decorate the European and the North American landscape, the vast majority of which are uncannily accurately aligned with stellar constellations. And they are decorated in various forms. They at first glance look mute, standing stones.
This is in line with the period of symbolism.
Yes.
Yeah. Star worship.
They're beginning to go slightly beyond that, and when you get to large structures such as Newgrange or Maze Howe, you start to find intricate carvings of whorls and circles, each entwined within the other. And you're starting to reach forward from that to one of the early Christian symbols for Almighty God, which is of course the perfect circle. But the Neolithics wanted something different. They had been able to detect earth energies, what we would now call ley lines, power points. How they did it, we don't know. They had innate abilities that we have since been trained out of us by modern society. And this whirling continuous line of circular form, almost like a maze, or a labyrinth more accurately than a maze, developed into stone labyrinths. There's one at the Scilly Isles, which predates Christianity by about 2,000 years, which maps out precisely the same path that is laid out in the labyrinth at Chartres or at Amiens Cathedral. So there's a continuity of ideas here, and from this flowed the serpent idea, which became one of the ancient Gnostic symbols for wisdom, and the serpent eating its tail, or the serpent eating a small child. Again, a symbol of wisdom, and some of the Rex Deus families who claim descent from the priesthood of the temple in Jerusalem, on their coats of arms, you will find this serpent, particularly when it's eating a child, is again a symbol of Gnostic enlightenment.
And why would that be? Why would they choose the serpent?
Because it is the ancient symbol of wisdom, of connection with God, of earthly power, God's
Is that
presence
because
on earth.
Why would they particularly choose a serpent? Even in the most ancient times.
Well, you'd have to ask an expert like yourself as to why about it. All I can comment on is the fact that they did, and it became universally accepted as a sign of beneficial influence of God on earth. Now, it was the Christians who brought about this idea that the serpent is a sign of evil. To the Druids, it was a sign of the weevil.
Druids, otherwise known as adders.
Yes.
It's fascinating you mentioned weave, because the Hebrews used to write in a particular way, which they called the weave too.
That's right.
And which they related to the serpent.
Yeah.
So the two cultures there seem to cross.
But you've always got this cross-fertilisation. And you've got 2 or 3 different things coming into play here. I mean, Joe Campbell's work on the mythology of different peoples who've been separated in time and space very considerably, who come to, broadly speaking, the same conclusions, and with very, very similar mythologies about creation.
But if these symbols come from archetypes within our mind, then it's perfectly possible, isn't it, that they could have erupted separately?
I don't think it's possible. I think it's a matter of fact.
Okay.
I don't think this is a possibility to be considered. It's an observable matter of fact. Every culture has its own similar mythology, ascribing various gifts such as conservation and so forth to divine providence. In ancient Egypt we had similar, even the writing was symbolic, but they carry meanings which are subliminal,
Right.
which you're not aware of perceiving until perhaps long afterwards or after repeated viewing. They carry their own message, and they claimed, the ancient Egyptians claimed, that on the initiatory path you were taught things that could not be transmitted in words. And symbols do just that.
Yes.
I mean, I can describe the meaning of symbolism until I'm blue in the bloody face. And it's actually missing the whole point. The point of my description is to get you to go and experience it for yourself. Now, please note I say experience, not merely look at.
Yeah.
Because it will have a very profound effect on you if it is a true. Back to the cave paintings. They were always at the most profound depths of the cave, at the points of maximum resonance. You move on to the Neolithic era to Maes Ha or to Newgrange, and you will find large standing stones within the corridors which perform no architectural function whatsoever.
Right.
They're there as sound baffles to amplify sound at a certain place. Go to the great chambers in the pyramids, the King's Chamber. It is actually built on a ridged foundation, so it rings like a bell when you walk across it. It maximizes the resonance, and the roof structure is designed to enhance that. So architecturally, you have a way of enhancing natural energy, i.e. sound.
Sound. So sound is another symbol.
Sound is another symbol. And Egyptian temples, we know as a matter of record, were charged by chanting.
Okay.
And there are many places in Europe today where you can go into a medieval church building, and if you're lucky you will find a flagstone inscribed with the Latin phrase canto hic.
Yes.
Sing here. You try it. You're at the place of maximum resonance and perfect acoustics, and your voice will carry throughout the church, whether you speak or whether you sing.
Right.
Sound energy in the form of sound or light or just earth energy is of immense importance. And all the sacred sites of this world, that were built much before the 14th century are on places of earth energy. About 30 or 40 years ago, the Catholic Church, in its infinite wisdom, abolished the old Tridentine Mass, which used to be chanted in Latin, and brought their services into the vernacular of whatever country they were.
Right.
There were a bunch of monks in central France who used to chant their office, Gregorian chant, in Latin, now had to sing it in French. After a very short period of time, a matter of a couple of years, they started to notice a big uplift in the mental problems experienced by those monks. Somebody had a moment of insight and went back to the old Gregorian Latin chant, and the health levels returned to normal.
Incredible.
That's one aspect of it. Morton Smith, who discovered part of the Lost Gospel of Mark at Nasheba Monastery, when he first visited it as a student in Israel, the monastery was run by Orthodox monks by candlelight, and they had the Greek chant, unaccompanied but beautiful.
It is beautiful. Yeah.
And the combination of the sound of the Greek chant and the flickering candlelight, another form of energy, was transformative. There was a shift in consciousness that Morton Smith recorded and noted.
Yeah.
He went back there 40 years later and they were using electric light in it. So sound and light are of vital importance. And of course sound and light in any sacred space, whether you're talking about Neolithic times or modern day, are a product of architecture and design. So you have that aspect of it. Architecture can also act as an amplifier for earth energies.
Yeah.
So you have that aspect.
Which are equated to the serpent.
Yes. Back to the weaver again.
Yeah.
So you've got all those aspects of it. And then you have the actual shape and form of the building itself, which takes on symbolic significance.
Are we talking sacred geometry?
Yes, you are talking sacred geometry, and the best person whose work you should consult on this is a lovely man, Keith Critchlow, who now lives down in Devon, who's done some wonderful work, and God bless him, he has gone through every faith known to mankind and left a building worth examining. And the continuity of ideas that come through, although they take different forms in different cultures, the things that these ancient people were aiming at were always the same. To maximize the natural energies that come from God to bring us closer to God. Blanche Mertz did some lovely work on Chartres Cathedral about the wavelengths of light as transmitted through the stained glass. Now the stained glass at Chartres is different from the stained glass in any other cathedral in the world. It was only made to that quality for a very brief period of time. And in 30 years the cathedral was being built. And then the whole quality changed. And according to Mertz, and who am I to doubt her words, that only filters through the wavelengths that are beneficial to transformative change, to a shift in consciousness. So at Chartres, which is the perfect place to go, you have an amplification of the earth energies which are enormous, which has been artificially aided by creation of artificial rivers under the cathedral, which are a 7-branched set of streams joining one.
7 branched.
Yes, the magical word of 7 again.
There's also a wonderful labyrinth there.
Yes, you've got the labyrinth there, you've got the Christian symbolism of the cruciate form of the church. You have the engrailed cross represented because of the buttresses, the same engrailed cross used by the Sinclairs of Ross.
Yeah.
And you also have the sound amplification from the architecture itself. Plus the fact that you could find the glory of God in the perfection of number, measure and weight. So the proportions are superb.
This perfect connection of the human person
to the
to the divine.
Yes.
On earth.
Yes. And it gives you...
It's kind of like a gateway to heaven then.
Yes. That's exactly what it is. And you go to Chartres today and you'll find it crowded with tourists. And it doesn't matter a damn if they're Christian of whatever denomination, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, or no religion at all. They all come away uplifted.
Right.
Because it is the universal application of symbolism in the grand scale.
And yet, this is a wonderful holistic healing you're talking about.
Yes, but it's healing of a totally different nature.
It's on a many level.
It's multi-leveled, and it's a healing of the soul.
So maybe we should build hospitals in the same sacred geometry.
Similar things are done.
Really?
In India. Yes. I suggest that anybody interested in that study the hospitals attached to the Sai Baba Institute in India. And they will get some rather pleasant surprises. Their success in heart surgery exceeds the Western world quite appreciably. It's a discernible difference. And that's a combination of spirituality and modern science. Don't forget that spirituality and science had a common root in ancient Greece.
Well, it seems to only be us that like to split things into little boxes.
Yes, well, Cartesian thinking. See, this is the whole point about symbolism. Modern Cartesian scientific thinking splits things down to its smaller parts and somehow loses the entire picture. Symbolism encompasses far more than its pictorial content. It radiates its own energy. It strikes a chord within your soul.
Yeah.
I wrote a book a few years ago called Rosslyn, Guardian of the Secrets of the Holy Grail, which described a pilgrimage through ancient medieval sites. And a lot of people have crossed the Atlantic to recreate that, as well as those who live in Europe who've done it. Some of those have been kind enough to write and thank me for it. They've all described transformative experiences. They're all different, hand-tailored to their needs, their strengths, their weaknesses, and they all occurred at different places on that route. But there is a thing about the spiritual quest. You need, above all, willingness, patience, and perseverance, and you need some guidance. To set out on it on its own, unguided and untutored, can be incredibly dangerous. The Steiner people claim that the portals to the spiritual world are guarded by the twofold face of evil, to try and prevent you going there. That may well be true. The number of people who've developed psychotic conditions from untutored spiritual adventure is rather frightening.
Yeah.
The trick is to be able to spend the time and experience symbolism. And in some of the buildings in Europe today, you can trace virtually the entire spiritual history of man.
The main one, of course, being the cross.
The cross predates Christianity by many millennia and takes a variety of forms, which includes the swastika, which was used and abused by the Nazi Party during the last war. Probably the earliest cross of real validity that we can use would be the Ankh from Egypt. And this idea of an almost equal barred cross again is very ancient, and that crept into Christianity and also was used by several of the heretical streams. The discoid cross, which is a four-barred cross, rounded ends, and splays, is actually one of the many crosses used by the Templars, and not purely by the Templars, by other people too. It's known as the Croix Celeste, and it is the cross of universal knowledge, or gnosis. So
the cross most people would recognise as being a Templar cross.
Yes. There are something like 34 different Templar crosses. that I know of, and there are
that will be
probably more.
enlightening to the viewers.
Yeah, and that's only the ones I know about.
Yeah.
And they each have a different meaning. The cross of the Eight Beatitudes, which is the one usually known as the Maltese cross, where it comes to a double point at the end of each
Yes.
part of the cross, that is actually used as an architectural drawing tool. And it's part of the foundation of octagonal sacred geometry.
That would make perfect sense. If anybody wants to draw that on
Yeah.
a piece of paper, they'll notice the angles are very interesting.
Yes, and if you can get hold of one, and it's a very common type of cross for military decorations,
Yeah.
and if you can mount that on a pin at its centre point, it becomes a very useful architectural drawing tool.
You mean-
It is a beautiful compass,
Okay.
and it also gives you the points for
Ah,
separating
yes.
out your 8 points geography.
That makes perfect sense of what Crichton Miller talks about with the Celtic cross.
Yes, exactly the same principle. The Celtic cross is a variation, surprise, surprise, of the Croix Celeste.
Yeah.
How surprising. And the Celtic Church didn't believe Jesus was God, Jesus was my druid. Symbols, as I say, can be, they can be interpreted at so many different levels that you can have an outwardly Christian symbol built by a heretic
Yeah.
to convey a heretical message, which will still be meaningful to the Christian.
Yeah.
And this is the glory of it.
Yeah.
But
Well,
because
so
you have
you're
this...
saying the origin of the cross, or the earliest cross we can find, is possibly the Ankh.
No, that's the earliest easily recognisable one for
Okay.
most people. There are earlier ones. So
There's an earlier one in Sumeria, isn't there?
Yes, you go back to Sumeria, and then you start to get crosses developing quite a bit in Hindu symbolism. And another very universal symbol, which took prominence in Europe during the medieval time, is the green man. You find that in every culture from China on westward.
It's all right.
Yes.
Fascinating.
And again, held to derive from Sumeria or from Babylon, the worship of Ishtar and Tammuz. Ishtar was either described as the wife and consort of Tammuz or the mother of Tammuz. Tammuz was the god who died every autumn and resurrected every spring and became symbolic of spiritual rebirth.
Sounding familiar.
Yeah, you would be starting to get it. And when Tammuz is described as the son of Ishtar, Ishtar is described as the widow. And because he had been spiritually reborn, he was known as the son of the widow. And initiates in the Egyptian terminology were also known as the sons of the widow. And in theory, if I was anywhere where there are Freemasons about and I said, who's going to come to the aid of the son of a widow, they should come rushing up to me with their checkbooks.
I should try that one.
Yeah.
It sounds very similar to, obviously, the Christian concept, but also Osiris and Horus and Isis.
Yes, Isis and the Horus child. And this creeps into Christian symbolism with, of course, the glorious features known as the Black Madonnas. Now, again, you get a few of those in Northern Europe, but usually in the form of paintings. Czestochowa, where the late Pope came from, has got a very, very famous one. But carvings of Black Madonnas, you can find them in Switzerland, and particularly in central and southern France, and also in northern Italy. I saw probably the largest and most vulgarly decorated Black Madonna of my life in northern Italy, in a little place near Varese. And the church was emblazoned with the Visconti arms. And the Visconti arms are, of course, being Rex Dare's families, carried the snake with the baby in its mouth. So in that one little church, we got the whole bit. And in the ceiling paintings, we had references to the Magdalene as the bride of Christ. Very subtle to get away from the church censors.
Something strange crosses my mind is that if this story of the Christ, Mary kind of group that we've got going here, Osiris, Isis, Horus, is something that is telling us a sacred truth, then was the real Jesus and the real Mary, were they made to really enact some sacred truth in reality, or was their story adapted afterwards?
Both.
Right.
According to Dr. Hugh Schonfield, who was one of the original Dead Sea scholars, there was a conspiracy to recreate and fulfill prophetic
to kind of
events.
manifest this symbolism
Manifest it,
in
yeah.
symbolic form.
In other words, to become a living symbol.
Yeah, so we've gone from rock art to living symbolism.
Living symbols. And that continuity carries on today. For example, a nun within the Catholic Church is known as a bride of Christ, and she has to emulate that sort of devotion. We are all referred to as sons of God, but the term Son of God in the time of Jesus had a totally different meaning to the one put on it by the Christian Church. King David was referred to as the Son of God. Jesus was referred to after his death as the Son of God, but not by the Jews. And anybody who followed his teaching and attained enlightenment would become a son of God. Then in more general religious teaching over the last few centuries, it's dawned on people the blatantly obvious truth that we're all sons and daughters of God. So the meanings change, but the essential fundamental truth conveyed by symbols stay the same. And the pathway to trace them from the cave paintings in France and Spain, beauty all of its own. And it is all dedicated to the beauty of God, but in every section of it you will find one deliberate mistake.
Right.
Because only God is perfect. And man must remember this.
Yeah.
It's a matter of humility. Islamic architecture, to go to the Dome of the Rock,
It's an incredible place.
it's an incredible place, or to go to some of the beautiful buildings in Spain today, because don't forget that the Muslims occupied Spain for 6 centuries.
The malls.
And they have left an architectural heritage which is utterly wonderful.
Yeah.
Symbolism occurs today in modern life through advertising. It's not a dead art. And the power of a symbol to evoke a predictable response is still very much used. Now it's sadly being used for commercial purposes rather than spiritual ones. To people who've travelled any distance along the spiritual path, you start to learn through experience what these things mean. And if you're really blessed, you've got a teacher who shows you. And once they have opened the door by showing you the initial levels, your own spiritual quest will develop abilities within yourself to discern even these signs and symbols were placed there deliberately, because at that time, if you disagreed with Holy Mother of the Church, you would be persecuted, your family would be exterminated, you'd be burnt at the stake, your property would be confiscated. The Church, knowing that it was built on a series of lies, had to defend them, and defend them they did, brutally. And in the name of the Prince of Peace, they instituted the Inquisition. The first person to be burnt for heresy goes back as 385 or 383.
That early?
Yes, Priscillian of Avila. The first decrees against heresy were promulgated immediately after the Council of Nicaea. you may find clues which tell you to look closer. For example, take Chartres again. Here is a Christian church. Behind the head of Jesus, as I've mentioned, you have the Gnostic cross of knowledge. Go down a little bit further onto the door to the right of the central door, and you will find a carving of Pythagoras. Now, Pythagoras, we know, historically speaking, is the first identifiable initiate of the Egyptian mystics, mysteries in European history. What the hell is he doing on a Christian church?
He's there to tell us something.
He's there to tell us something. He's there to tell us to keep our eyes open. So the combination of the Gnostic cross and Pythagoras tell us something. Above the main pillars supporting the three doors, there is a carved frieze of the life of Jesus. It's got all the major events of the life of Jesus, except one. It moves straight from Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem to his entombment. Now, what, I ask you, is the central plank of Christian doctrine? Yet it's not there. And there is not a carving of the crucifixion in Chartres Cathedral anywhere that is contemporaneous with the first 150, 200 years of that cathedral's existence. Now, these are the little type of triggers you look for. So that tells me that when I go around, I am quite free and quite safe to interpret any symbol I see at another level from the Christian.
Yeah.
And you will find triggers like this. I spent a lot of time in churches in the Languedoc, and where I find an absence of a crucifixion and John the Baptist being extolled, I start to think, hello, they want me to look a bit closer. So then you start to look. And the big giveaway at Chartres is in the portal of the Initiates. Just to the right of the portal of the Initiates, after you've looked at all these wonderful carvings of the ancient biblical prophets, there is a beautiful carving almost on its own, that you could pass by very easily, of Elisha handing down his cloak to Elijah. This principle of spiritual transmission of master to pupil.
Like the baraka of the Sufis.
That's it, exactly that. In fact, when a Sufi master dies, he hands down his cloak or his hat to his senior pupil, who then becomes the sheikh.
Known as the shroud.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. There is one symbol which seems to confuse a lot of people, especially in relationship to the Da Vinci Code and Holy Blood, Holy Grail, all that side of things, and the Templars, is this Baphomet. I know that you have a take on that.
Baphomet is many things. Some say it's a corruption of the name Muhammad, which has some degree of credibility because the Templars, particularly the ones in the esoteric inner circle, spent a lot of time in the East.
They spent time with the Sufis.
Yeah, they were
the
very close.
Yeah. So that would come
Then
from Muhammad.
Hugh Schonfield applied the Atbash cipher to Baphomet.
This is where you take the last letter and make it the first, and the first
While
letter.
you play around with it, there is a complex coding system which was in common usage for a century or so before the Dead Sea Scrolls were written, and which allowed you to encode different meanings into an apparently innocent transcript. And he came up with the principle of Sophia, the ancient Greek goddess of wisdom. So we're talking here again about spiritual enlightenment. If you look at the Croix Celeste, again, the principle of wisdom. If you look at many of the carvings at Chartres of the biblical prophets, they are standing on snakes or winged dragons. The classic one is the carving of John the Baptist in the portal of the Initiates, who is standing on a winged dragon and carrying the Lamb of God in his arms. And he is the physical link between the Gnostic symbol of the serpent, God's energy on earth, and Jesus as the Lamb of God. In other words, I am his teacher, which is something that the Holy Mother of the Church has been refuting for centuries.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Then you have the carving I've already mentioned of Elisha handing down his cloak. But in the portal of Initiates, when you look first at the carving of Melchizedek, the priest king of Salem, immediately over Melchizedek's head is an angel Follow the eye line of the angel and you hit straight into the upturned gaze of Abraham, who's just about to sacrifice his son. And the angel is saying, no deal, brother. God doesn't want this. It is forbidden. So if the principle of sacrifice for the sins of others is forbidden to all Jews, how come they claim Jesus made a sacrifice for others? It's also an ancient Kabbalistic principle that the innocent shall not suffer for the guilty. So how come Jesus, who is free from sin, suffers for the guilty? There are so many different ways of refusing church doctrine encoded into the carvings. And
it seems to go back to a nice Gnostic concept that you must take on responsibility for yourself.
That's right.
Which is one of the first things on the road to wisdom.
That's right. I am responsible. I have the freedom to choose, provided I am prepared to live with the consequences for myself and others.
Yeah.
I am responsible for those. And this is the whole principle. You cannot separate out freedom and responsibility. No. They're Siamese twins.
It's a great message for people today, really, because we go around blaming church and state and other people for the way we are.
I could never make any spiritual progress whatsoever until I stopped playing the blame game, at which I was an expert.
That's still many ways.
I'm responsible for me.
Yeah.
What you see is what you get.
And that's the first point on the road towards this true wisdom that the Gnostics are telling us about in
That's right.
symbols.
And it's also immutable.
Yeah.
The same truth that applied to mankind 2,000 years ago applies today.
Yeah.
We haven't changed physiologically, spiritually, or intellectually very much.
No. Does your research into symbolism around the world highlight anything of profound importance for people today?
Yes, it does. It tells me that the dilemma I faced some years ago when I set out on the path is part of the heritage of mankind. It shows me that there is a continuity of people seeking. It also discloses through its results in people's lives that there are beneficial results to be attained today. The church sold us a bloody appalling pup when it said spiritualism was getting brownie points for pie in the sky later, eternal membership of the feathered choir, a prospect that fills me with horror. It's nothing to do with that. Spirituality is about transforming my life and yours today so that we become better people. We can rest easy with a clear conscience. We can treat each other with the respect and love that other people, being equal children of God, deserve. You look at the teachings of all the great faiths, and there is one phrase which, slight variation, runs through them all. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do not to others that if done to thee would be harmful. This is the essence of teaching. This is why the hidden streams of spirituality who kept the truth of Jesus' teaching alive and separate from all the accretions of dogma and nonsense that the various churches have put on, they stress brotherhood, fraternity, self-sacrifice, charity to one another. Look at the basic teachings of biblical Judaism. They are a series of highly complex structures, but all about how do we behave as human beings one to another in our different stations. Fundamentally, the precepts of Islam are exactly the same. They're just phrased differently for a different culture and a different time. The church said that Jesus told us to love thy neighbour as thyself. And then the church set out to persecute and harry all those who disagreed with it. It set out to make war with those who believed a different business. It has left a stain on European history which is ineradicable, and the effects of which we are still suffering from. And within its teaching, buried under the dogma, the spiritual keys that led the medieval mystics to a state of grace, and that still lead people of faith, be they Catholic or Protestant, Buddhist or Baptist, to great acts of transformation even today. One can follow the spiritual path from outside the churches or from within. But if you're doing it from within, you've got a fair amount of digging to do before you can get started. That's the problem. And the symbolism are signposts on that path.
Yeah.
They tell us where to look, where to pray. Because there are places of immense power. And that has been known to man ever since he started trotting this earth. That's why we have cave paintings. That's why we have Neolithic structures. That's why we have beautiful cathedrals and mosques and temples.
One of the things that I found on my search in Gnostic wisdom is that it's a return back to nature.
Yes.
And that's exactly what you're pointing out.
Yes.
We intuitively know these places.
Yes. We intuitively know it because we are part of it. We are not masters of nature. We are simple parts and constituent parts of it. And if we get it wrong in the way we treat nature, the greenhouse effect will wipe us off the state of the planet. But the planet will still continue. It will still continue to evolve and animals will still evolve. We just won't be here to see it. And that'll be our fault.
Yeah.
The ancients did not rape Mother Earth. You don't rape your own mother.
No.
We do.
They gave thanks. They gave back.
Yes.